Think back in your lives. First, to your most pleasant experience. What was the most pleasant, sometimes the most memorable experience in life? It's unlikely that if it was pleasant that you've forgotten. Just go through in your mind about that experience. What was it about? I'm not going to ask anybody to share their experience, but I can probably bet one thing. That very pleasant, very memorable experience involves people. Am I right? It might be a trip somewhere, wherever is your dream destination, a cruise, a fantastic trip somewhere. That cruise, all alone, would not be very pleasant or memorable. True? It's the people that make the event, the occasion special. Another thing I'd ask you to do, think in your minds about your most painful experience. What caused you the most pain, most anguish? It's unlikely to be a physical injury. I've broken my hand, I've had serious leg injuries. It's not that. I suggest to you that your most painful experience is also about broken relationships. Something went wrong in the relationship, either betrayal or breaking of trust or breaking of confidence or someone losing the currency of relationships, which is personal trust. So our most pleasant relationships, our most painful experiences all revolve around relationships. But we are now talking about reporting in contexts where we look very scantily at relationships. Traditional financial reporting is really lacking in several areas. Traditional financial reporting has made money the measure of all things. When you do our financial reports, when you look at what it is that we need to report back, we look at money as the measure of all things. We found that financial reports cater only to one kind of stakeholder, who is the shareholder. Those are the owners of what you call financial capital. It ignores and totally does not consider all the other capitals: intellectual capital, human capital, social capital, and so on. Financial reporting traditionally has no concern for other stakeholders. It is shareholder-centric. Other shareholders do not come into the mix. Traditional financial reporting has got little concern for what we call ESG issues, environmental, stakeholder, and governance issues. And these are the modern day key stakeholders. You've got to be aware of what your environment is like. You've got to be aware of your resources in the broader sense of that word, not just your financial resources. So this is really what we have found is lacking in the way we have traditionally, as corporate entities, reported on our results. Results are almost exclusively financial, and there's something that we're finding is going wrong. This is what they have forgotten, that it's not all about money. They've forgotten, they've failed to answer a key question. How do you define your company's value beyond revenue or income? So what are today's companies about? Today's companies, and even today's companies that are modern and progressive, are being called relational companies, are looking at value and values. So it's not just income, but you're looking at a broader set of values. It's about creating value, not just generating income. So they talk about income or revenue, even profits, no matter how important you think that is, as being a lagging indicator. That's a term from the M&E world. A lagging indicator means it comes after other prior indicators have come. Profit is actually, to use another financial term, a derivative. It is derived from, or it depends on other indicators. It depends on how good your relationships are with your customers, with your suppliers, how well you're managing your staff, a key stakeholder. That is what generates your profits and your income. So income is an indicator of something much more fundamental that lies underneath. Today's modern relational companies are thinking about all stakeholders, not just shareholders. They look at stakeholder communication, or to use a better word, stakeholder engagement. It is not just compliance reporting. You don't just do things because you're required to do by statute or by law, but you want to engage with them intentionally and you've got a plan to do it. They're looking at the social purpose of a company, not just profit. We wrongly believe that if you're in business to make money. Well, if you're in business to make money, you won't be making money very long. Get into business to serve, to offer a service, to offer a product at a profit, but there should be a bigger purpose than just money. And today's companies are looking at business sustainability over the long term, not just the short term. This is what makes a company, an organization, an entity relational in nature. This is what makes it relational in its actual ethos and practice, not just in words. So if we are to think about integrated reporting from a relational perspective, we need to move and begin thinking in these terms. This is what has been happening in the past. We had financial reporting, but financial reporting, as I said, was all about financials. We then moved one step up to sustainability reporting. But sustainability reporting was done separate from financial reports. And there's some companies in Kenya, I think Safaricom has got a very good sustainability report. If you've seen it, you should reach out to it. KCB as well is another organization. I know Unilever, certainly on a global level, do good sustainability reports. But sustainability reports were separate from financial reports. And then they moved to integrated reporting. The International Integrated Reporting Council has this as their vision. And I quote, "To have a world in which integrated thinking is embedded, it is ingrained in public and private sectors with integrated reporting as the corporate reporting norm." Integrated reporting should be the corporate reporting norm, not the exception. And this is actually a phenomenon that is growing very fast worldwide. In the UK, this is a requirement, as it is in the Netherlands, and there's actually work by the IRC to make this standard out throughout Europe. In Asia, the same is happening. It's spreading very fast. In South Africa, partly because of Professor Mervyn King, who's South African, he's very heavily influenced the Johannesburg Securities Exchange, and all listed companies on the JSE are required to report on an integrated manner, looking at giving value and reporting on how they've added value across all stakeholders, not only on their financials. So this is actually something that is going to spread. Tom Peters, the well-known management guru, said, "Success in business is 100% relationships, but rarely do we measure them." So my friends, it's all about relationships. We know that as people, we are hardwired for relationships. But why is it that organizations haven't yet caught up to this reality? Why is it that the organizations are about people, they haven't yet discovered that strong relationships between shareholders help organizations succeed and thrive? And yet, this is what everything we do, our culture, our values, our faith, our science has been teaching us. And just let me make the case by doing this. What do we do culturally? We teach people to value other people. We teach them, you must have been taught this, wherever you are brought up, to respect others, to respect the elderly, to respect the aged. These are cultural values that we cherish. We know that many faiths teach similar values on the importance of human relationships. And those of you who read the good book would know when Jesus was asked what is the greatest commandment, what did he say? To love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. That is a relational statement. When he was asked who shall be the greatest in the kingdom, what did he say? The greatest of you shall be a servant. How interesting that when he's asked these big questions, even Jesus is thinking relationally. But you know what? Even science tells us the same. Let me just get into a bit of the science. Here is a book by a well-known author, an award-winning author, who was talking about post-traumatic stress disorder from war veterans in the US. And he found that 80% of all the military suicides over a 35-year period were found to be amongst war veterans. The reason was that after they returned home, the struggle was not from the trauma on the battlefield, but from the individualistic societies they were trying to reintegrate to. To summarize it, these people who were out fighting came back home and they did not have strong relationships. They were relationally isolated, hence they took their lives. A fascinating study has been done by this psychologist called Susan Pinker. She's a well-known writer and psychologist, and this book of hers is actually a fascinating read. What she says is relationships are crucial. They're crucial for learning, for happiness, for resilience, and even for longevity. She says we're lonelier and unhappier now than we were before the age of the internet and the mobile phone. You know, loneliness is now the UK's biggest public health crisis. So important, last year they created, believe it or not, a Ministry of Loneliness with a full-time cabinet position to look after nothing else but loneliness. I would like to see how the vetting for that was done and what kind of questions were being asked. Ministry of Loneliness. It was a public health disaster. We've got many followers because we're digitally connected, but we've got very few friends. We're high-tech, but we are low-touch. And what Susan Pinker shows in her book, that relationships help extend longevity and give us better health outcomes. She shows, and a lot of research she comes up with, that women, for instance, who have breast cancer stand 4 times the chance of recovering if they have strong relationships than if they don't. She shows in her research that more women are actually depressed than men. However, more men commit suicide. Why? The women have social support groups. The men do not. So you women out there, and the ladies, I know you sometimes get criticized that you're spending so much time out meeting as women, discussing, and you come back home and your husband asks you, so what have you been discussing all that time? And they say, nothing, we're just chatting, sharing some gossip. And you said, is that all? Well, here's a comeback for your husband. Tell him, you know what, I was working on my longevity. It's good for my health. And the science actually shows this. Look at this chart that Susan Pinker provides. This is about staying alive or living for long. She says that social integration and close relationships are the highest predictors of longevity and personal health. It outdoes all those other things, quitting smoking, quitting drinking, going to the gym, all those other things, even a cardiac rehab, recovering from a heart attack. Actually having strong relationships, having strong interpersonal connectedness is actually what helps. What is important, she says, is face-to-face interaction. There's something that goes on. Actually in her, and you can watch, she's even got a TED talk. She says that actually what happens when you have face-to-face interaction like this, you activate more parts of your brain because there's a human interaction going on. It's actually good exercise for the brain when you're facing each other. But you know what? We have gone digital. As we like saying, we've moved from analog and we've become digital. So this is how we interact today. This is digital interaction, digital conversation. How many of us are guilty of charged of producing the phone on a date? I can see all those hands, and those who aren't putting up their hands are probably putting up their hand in their heart. They are digitally. Do you know we have become a digital generation and we're not actually communicating? What happens when somebody has a celebration? You look for an emoji with a hand clap and you post it and send them. Here's a hand clap and another emoji with a hands up or fingers, and you send them an emotional handshake and an emotional. You never show up. You've got followers on Twitter, followers on Facebook, but very few friends. How many of them show up and do you have a personal relationship with? I was with someone else and someone said, he greeted this other person. Very well said, oh, don't you know me? I'm one of your followers on Facebook. He had no idea. Just a follow-up. What happens when we have someone is bereaved? Even our tears are digital. You look for an emoji with tears and you say, I'm with you, and you send them the tears. Even we mourn with people how? Digitally. We've become low touch, low tech. This is not good for our health. So, we have been accurately measuring wrong things. And this is a fascinating story, quote by Robert Kennedy. When he says GDP, which is what we measure, doesn't allow for all those things. I'm reading what is in bold there. He says it does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debates or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It's measuring everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. This is why, believe it or not, people are coming up with those other measures which are put down there. Have you heard of the Gross National Health Index or Happiness Index? Have you heard of the Human Development Index? They're looking, these are serious economists, measuring happiness, measuring health. They're looking for other indicators beyond money. Do you know something about GDP? If there are many thefts and they build more prisons to lock up prisoners, our GDP goes up. Any economist will tell you. The GDP has gone up. There's been an increase in construction. The purchase of steel has gone up, and cement, and transport. GDP has increased. What is that? That's a lagging indicator. What's the underlying indicator? More theft. Are we a healthier, happier society? Are we measuring the right thing? So we need to look at society through a relational lens. Looking at societies relationally helps us understand several things. Pensions, for example. How do you think about a pension relationally? You're working, hopefully you'll get a pension at the end. Is your pension only financial or is it relational? There was a doctor who died. He was very well known. He had, unfortunately racked up a high medical bill. So there was a Harambe. The bill was 10 million shillings. It was raised within one night. He had not much financial pension. He had tremendous relational pension. Pension, we have wrongly believed, is a financial concept. Pension is actually relational. Look at justice. The breakdown we have in crime and justice is because people feel excluded from society and outsiders. There's nothing in it for them. So they commit crime against another person. That is relational injustice. So the breakdown in society's relationships leads to high crime. And also because there are no strong relationships, people find it hard to reintegrate into society, so they commit more crime, become a repeat offender. Think about education. People have shown through research that the most important software in a school is not technology or a smart job or even a laptop. It is a quality teacher and the relationship of that teacher to their students. That is what produces results. So if you think through all these things relationally, we begin to understand that relationships drive society. The interesting point, however, is that relationships can actually now be measured. That was what was restricting us and holding us back all this time. There were no tools available to measure relationships. So, when you talk about relationships, there are ways of managing and measuring this. And this is what Professor King says himself, that management must have ongoing communication with stakeholders. If not, a CSRO must do this. So, they have got to report on the needs, interests, and expectations of key stakeholders. At every board meeting, Professor King says, there should be an agenda item labeled stakeholder relationships. And this is what should be reported onto, as well as other financials. The organization I work for has this tool, and we're licensed to operate it. And this is really what it measures. It measures, one, the quality of internal and external relationships. It measures this along 5 dimensions, which I'll be sharing. It can also measure relationships between departments, between staff and their superiors, between an organization and its different stakeholders. So you organize your stakeholders into stakeholder groups. put these stakeholder groups into different categories and begin measuring the health and the quality of those relationships. It creates a deep understanding of organizational relational health. It gives a two-dimensional relational analysis. This is different from a client survey. A client survey tells you to ask the client what they think of you. Relational analytics, through this model, has an index about what the client thinks about you, but also about what you think about the client on each of those 5 dimensions. So you can see where there is convergence and where there is divergence in your views. And you focus your discussion on, you focus your action plan on the areas of divergence. And this reduces operational risk, it reduces financial as well as reputational risk. So those are, here are the 5 dimensions. You're looking, first of all, at communication. How often do you communicate with your key stakeholders? And as we saw earlier, face-to-face communication is the best. So use that as a default. As far as you can, look for face-to-face communication, even if aided by technology, and move to written communication only next. Continuity has to do with what is the ongoing nature of this relationship. You want relationship over time. It is a dimension of time. Is there continuity in our relationship? Or are we just meeting one off? Content means what is the multi-dimensionality of our relationship? Are there many things we can discuss? Is there much content and richness in our discussion? So you look at the things that actually make the relationship rich and meaningful. If you think about your best relationships, you can get to discuss with the same person on so many dimensions, on so many different areas. You've got so much content and so many things you share because you have a rich relationship. That's content. Commonality means, do you have shared purpose? Have you got common interests, or are you only looking at self-interest? And control is about power. Who has the bigger control in the relationship? Do you feel that you have got no stake and no say? Do you feel you're always being bullied? Or do you feel that you have a voice and your voice is taken seriously? That is what you talk about control. So this, the tool will then look at this, those 5 metrics and measure, as I said, the 2 indexes. So you can see in the blue what the client thinks, and in the red what the organization or the company thinks on each of those metrics. You can see here where there is convergence, on common communication and continuity, pretty much convergence, but when it comes to content and control, very big divergence. So that is where you focus your communication. That's where you focus, and that becomes the basis of the start of a conversation to fix what goes wrong in this relationship. The challenge about relationships is that unless you begin to put some metrics to it, it becomes very emotional. People say, you know what, I don't like that person's face. You know what, what's wrong with that woman? You know what, why does he behave like this? And you're talking about, personality. You're talking about character traits. It's nothing substantive. How do you fix a relationship like that if someone says, I don't like her face? And yet that is someone you must engage with. I don't like the way he looks. You can't do anything about it. So when you've got those kind of emotional, unmeasured kind of communication, there's nothing you can do about it. When you dimensionalize your relationships this way, it shows where to focus the discussion. Don't talk about looks and personality. Focus on the issues. So this is just showing some of the stakeholder relational attributes. You're looking at stakeholder interest on the left. You're looking at stakeholder contribution on the right. And you're looking at the stakeholder communities or stakeholder groups in the middle. So this just shows a simple analysis of what are the stakeholder groups, what are the interests on the left, and what is the contribution. And the way to do this is to try and find correspondence between the interests of the different stakeholder groups between the society and between the company and the stakeholders. You can map, you can measure, and you can dialogue. And you can actually do your quadrant analysis like this. You look at interests and you look at influence. What are the interests of the stakeholders? What is the influence of each of those stakeholders? You see how to map them, how to measure them, what specifics to dialogue on, and how to make changes. This is something, by the way, for those of you who are involved in public participation. I know this is something actually which is, there's legislation going through the AG's office now to actually govern and improve the standards on public participation. And this is something that one should really be doing a lot more scientifically, because we find that public participation, there's a whole science to it, and I don't have the time to get into the details now, needs to be done in ways that are inclusive. It needs to be done in a way that is informed, and it needs to be done in a way that is participatory. For instance, public participation, some people hold groups where they want everyone to have voice and participate. And even the way the meeting is planned or structured is wrong. For instance, this setup here would be wrong. Why? We have a high table. A high table is a center of power. It is communicating that this is a center of power, and in one of those measures where it talked about control, there is no parity or equality between those with power at the high table and those without. So people stand up and says, oh, Mr. Chairman, I want to, and start apologizing. Oh, I'm sorry, but I wanted to say, but just allow me to say, but Mr. Chairman, if they're apologizing for the contribution, you have communicated and intimidated them by the power. And people even apologize. Samahani, nilikuwa nataka kusema, why are you apologizing before making your point? You have other centers where, if you look, for instance, at the presidential roundtable, what happens is done by people like Kepser and so on. At the presidential roundtable, there is no high table. His Excellency the President sits on a roundtable with other stakeholders from the industry. That high table is not for him, and there's other, in terms of seating order, it is for other people from the industry to share the table with them. Any speaker, including the President, stands up and comes to the podium. What have you communicated? Parity. You have communicated commonality. You have communicated shared interests. It encourages people to communicate. So even the way you design a stakeholder participation is important. How do you communicate the stakeholder participation? Do you post things on the internet, and yet we know that internet penetration in Turkana is very low, and you expect people to go there and find out? Or are you communicating through avenues that are available to these people and in a language they understand? And also, does participation mean that all decisions are passed unanimously? Someone says, I was not consulted. What they actually mean is you didn't take my opinion. So you need to find a way of capturing opinions and posting summaries to make sure that their views were heard, even if you don't take their particular view. How are you communicating that and showing that you did engage in participation, even if you did not take their views? So this is what happens when there's strong relationships. They deliver sustainable success in all these different dimensions. Enhanced operational outcome. It fosters mutuality and shared purpose. It gives investor confidence and produces organizational success. This is what Professor Mervyn King says, that all corporate failures show that people wake up to the fact of stakeholder measurement after the fact. He talks about scandals in Volkswagen and the scandal in Arthur Andersen and says, what would happen if stakeholders had been included and the people were not just thinking in the interests either of the board or the interests of the shareholders, but interests of stakeholders? It's interesting, when you look in the news today and you look at our financial failures in Kenya, in the retail sector, for instance, or in the banking sector, for instance, you ask yourself the question, were they acting in the best interest of the company, in the best interest of all stakeholders? When a retail entity has held money worth 40 billion shillings of different stakeholders, whose interests are they acting in? Look also about the link globally between political scandal and corporate scandal and failure in corporate governance and failure to look at stakeholders professionally. What is in the news today? We heard about 3 presidents, 2 of whom are in jail as we speak, and the third one who may end up there. The president of South Korea, former president, 24-year sentence. This is all in the news. What was the source of the scandal? She was in league with some corporates. There was corporate failure. And companies mentioned, this is all in the news, it's not for me, it's public domain, including Samsung. And they were channeling money to a private corporation or a private foundation that she controlled. 24-year sentence. What happened to the former president of Brazil? Just surrendered himself to the police to start a 12-year sentence, although there's a possibility of appeal. And it led to the decline, to the fall of his predecessor. What happened? Scandal again between the politicians and the corporate failures, a company called Petrobras, where they were thinking about financing politicians and getting favors for themselves in order to get political favor and then getting contracts for the company. Again, that happened. And you all know the story going on in South Africa about the former president. That is still ongoing. But again, there was a link between what he did in office and some private interests that he was accused of doing. So why is there this link between corporate scandal, failure in governance, failure in stakeholder management, and politics? It is lack of stakeholder thinking. As I conclude then, I just say this, that restoring confidence in corporate politics and other institutions requires more than clever PR. It requires systematic measurement and reporting on the quality of relationships with all major stakeholders so that companies can take specific steps to address these issues. Leaders of companies must act in the best interests of all stakeholders. Let's then do an organizational health check. If social isolation is bad for your health, is organizational isolation from stakeholders bad for organizational health? If one of the best predictors of longevity and health is the quality and strength of personal relationships, as I've shown, can we extrapolate and say the best predictor of organizational vitality and longevity is the quality and strength of its relationships with stakeholders? If your organization does not have strong, vital relationships, how long will it survive? It's all about multi-stakeholder engagement. It has been said in management that there are no secrets of success, only systems of success. A successful organization, don't ask, what's the secret? Ask, what is the system? There is a system underlying the success. Success sustained is not by accident. So then, the secret of success, I wish you, your organizations, and yourselves, prosperity, vitality, and longevity as you work and think relationally. Thank you.